Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining our webinar. Today we're going to talk how the state of Kansas keeps employees and citizens cyber secure. Before we jump into things, I'll just cover a couple housekeeping items. Right now you are in listen-only mode, which means you're currently muted, but we encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar using the questions panel provided on screen. We'll field as many of those questions as we can at the end, and then we'll follow up individually if we can't get to your question. My name is Tyler. I'm the Product Marketing Manager at Infosec IQ. Joining me today is Sonia, Client Success Manager here at Infosec, who works closely with our guests and will be leading today's Q&A. Joining us as well, our guest speakers. Welcome, Jeff Maxon. Jeff is the Information Assurance Manager for the state of Kansas. Jeff launched and operates a security awareness and training program for the state of Kansas executive branch and agencies within the state government. Along with his primary training responsibilities, he's also extended his security awareness and anti-phishing tool set to political subdivisions throughout the state of Kansas. Also joining us today is Phil Sobol. Phil is the IT Security Administrator for the City of Olathe, Kansas. Phil has a long resume of security awareness and anti-phishing training, and he took advantage of the training tools made available throughout the state by Jeff and his team to apply at the city level. Jeff and Phil have been kind enough to join us today to answer some of the questions that we're asked most often about running a successful security awareness program and educating people to beat the cyber threats that they face. Thanks again for joining us. And again, feel free to send any questions you have throughout the discussion. We'll field them at the end. And now I'll turn things over to Sonia, Jeff, and Phil. Take it away, guys.
Great, thanks, Tyler. As Tyler mentioned, I'm the Client Success Manager working closely with Jeff and Phil with their cybersecurity awareness programs. And I thought we'd just start out starting at a really high level, what their programs look like from maybe a 30,000-foot view. So Jeff, if you can start out first, just kind of start with telling us what motivated you in general to implement a security awareness and training program at the state of Kansas.
Good morning, everyone. This is Jeff Maxon. So at the state of Kansas, we really had multiple motivators on why I wanted to launch our own security awareness training program. But really the primary motivation was to ensure that all employees had access to a security awareness program and content that was beyond the typical, never-ending, never-changing PowerPoint slide deck that no one ever really read or paid attention to. And we also want to incorporate some practical lessons through phishing assessments tied to the security awareness, and finally be able to collect metrics against those phishing assessments and training metrics on completions, enrollments, who's fallen for phishing and hasn't taken training versus who is not falling for phishing and taking that training. Be able to basically report to our leadership on that. The ultimate goal is to seeing progress and trending downwards of phishing rates.
Great, that makes sense. So I guess a follow-up question, you mentioned a few key target goals, and one of them was getting access for all employees. What made you decide to make this available to all the state branches and agencies, and kind of how did that shake out?
So with most state governments, we're broken down into three branches, and executive branch being the largest in the state of Kansas. We have about 60 separate agencies, boards, commissions, and levels of employment range from several thousand employees down to some boards and commissions might have 3 employees. We have a requirement in the state that all employees and contractors receive security awareness training annually, and really they've all been kind of doing their own thing for a long time. So this was a way to kind of make sure everyone had access to similar content. So trying to bring everybody up to a high standard was why we want to make this available to everyone. And then to extend that, everybody within the state, cities, counties, school districts, they're all subject to the same cyber threats, and they're all constrained by the same resource constraints of, limited staff, things like that. So from a central state security office, we want to, if there's work that we could do to help out our colleagues in cities and counties, we were going to try and do that. So when we went through the RFP process, we wanted to make sure that we allowed them to buy off our contract and at least leverage some of the work we had done and some of the cost savings we could leverage for our purchasing power.
Great. Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess that would bring in Phil, since you work under that state contract for the City of Olathe, what kind of motivated you to take advantage of the IQ tool and the offerings that the state of Kansas brought on board?
I've been familiar with Infosec before because I'd taken a number of technical courses from them. And when we had a different provider and I was using them, and when I looked at this, of course, I looked at Infosec, what they had to offer. I had many conversations with Sonia prior to taking advantage of the state contract, but based on my experience with the organization and the pricing that Jeff got and a number of other factors, we implemented this training program, and it's worked out very, very well because the modules are very short and to the point, and people tend to like that. They don't like to have to sit there for an hour or whatever. It's 5 minutes and you're done and you can move on. So there were a lot of things that were factored in to take advantage of that. But the reputation of the organization plus the pricing that Jeff had been able to obtain were the two major factors.
That makes sense. So given that then, Phil, how exactly do you communicate, the benefit of taking advantage of those brief courses and all the other things that IQ offers to make sure that everyone at City of Olathe is aware and participating in the cybersecurity awareness training?
Well, right now we do annual security awareness training. So I'll put together a number of modules that are relevant to attacks that are out in the wild, and I'll look at other situations that are going on in and around the city. I'll also look at what we've done with phishing simulations in the past and try to determine how to push those out. But we also do quarterly phishing attacks. So I actually look and find I don't make it easy. I make it actually as difficult as I can to identify what is a phishing email, to try to raise awareness of our users. So benefiting this, when we started our program out, most people were like, I don't want to do this.
Right.
But once they looked at it and said, hey, this isn't bad. I kind of like this, and they found usefulness of it. And plus other things, we did all kinds of other outreach type of things with different tools we had to get the message out there. So right now, after a few years of this, we're now basically the hub for cybersecurity information.
Well, that makes sense. So given that then, Jeff, do you have a similar approach to how you're communicating since you have a lot more learners, several executive branches, et cetera? Does your communication strategy differ, or is it fairly similar to how Phil's rolling out to his learners?
Yeah, we really did kind of the same thing. We took the approach of, if we build it, they will come. So we procured this from a central offering style, and then we started conducting the baselines and getting numbers and start showing the agency leadership and department leadership, what's really happening, and then soliciting them to enroll for actually taking training, and then being able to show them progression, show that their training is taking effect, their users are paying attention. And once we can start communicating those numbers, like your awareness training is having benefits and reducing risk to the organization. once you can deliver those type of things to the stakeholders, and they really start latching on and wanting to move further and further and progress the program.
That makes sense. So Jeff, given that then, as far as the IQ platform goes with the phishing simulations and awareness training, how do you incorporate that into your training package when you're rolling that out live to your learners?
So before we started with anything, we conducted a baseline phishing simulation campaign against the state just to get general numbers. And then after we launched that baseline, we began enrolling some agencies that had volunteered right off the bat to participate. And then at the end of that first year, we conducted another baseline phishing campaign against the state, and we produced metrics across the state of who's been involved in our training, what their numbers look like, baseline prior to involvement of this platform, after, and we can compare those numbers between all the different agencies. And then also when agencies had come on board, and like I said earlier, they'd see the value, they'd start wanting to progress. So some agencies are now requesting, a continuous phishing campaign against their agency, just so they can be tracking those metrics on a monthly, quarterly basis. So, we really tie them together, as the phishing part is, really the practical part of the security awareness training. So I'm reading a PowerPoint or going through training and material is only as good as what people learn and can apply to practical lessons. So incorporating the phishing with that definitely includes a very practical and teachable moments as well.
That makes sense. Yeah. And especially if you're having folks come to you instead of trying to reach out and get other folks on board and those different agencies, I'm sure that kind of catches on. I was curious, given that, Jeff, you're working with several agencies, like I mentioned before, Phil, do you have this same experience at City of Olathe, where you have people reaching out and coming to you asking, if they can be more involved in the training, or is your experience a little different?
Well, in our, as we're working with HR right now to revamp the new employee orientation program. We were, new employee orientation was lasting like 4.5 hours. And it was, at the end of that, people are kind of tired. So
Right.
we're now working with HR to revamp that program so we can get the message out, maybe make it mandatory online training in their first 90 days that they're here. But normally, most of what we've done in the city is we've, basically, most people don't ask, is there something I can do for outreach? Most of the time they come to us and say, is this a phishing email? Or how do I do this? Or how do I protect my kids at school? We get some questions like that, but most of it's, is this a phishing email or not? So we do a lot of analysis at that. Other than that, we work with, we try to work with the communications group to find different ways to push our message out, push security awareness out. And like I said, we're already working with HR, so.
Great. Yeah, and that's even if people aren't coming to you to say, hey, fish us more, at least you're getting that engagement, and that's obviously the first step, right? That have people calling out, hey, help me out. Is this a phishing email? So definitely understand that. So I guess follow-up question then, Phil, is and I know the answer to this, but what kind of other resources or strategies helps keep these topics at the forefront for your learners?
Well, we were posting, of course, if I get something that's relevant. So let's say we have a actual attack in the region going on or nationwide, that I feel that everyone should know. We'll put out not only an email blast, but we'll also put it on our intranet site as a flash alert to let everyone know. Other than that, we just started. We will be rolling out Workplace by Facebook next week. And so I've already got a security channel on there. So we're going to be posting a lot of tips and tricks and other advice on there. We're trying to put together a way to get some of this information into our learning management system. So some of the things that we're currently doing or have done through the NEO program, we may go to the LMS with some of that as for customized training. But most of the time, we'll probably be using the platform we're currently on, which is the Infosec platform, to push information out. But we try to keep it forefront to everybody as much as possible without inundating them with it.
That makes sense. So, Jeff, do you take the same approach with supplemental resources along with the training modules and the phishing simulation? Are you also incorporating other resources like that?
Yeah, we try to best we can. We're a pretty small shop against a pretty large organization. So when we have things available to us via website or sending out reminders, or if there's, like Phil mentioned, we do have means to communicate out to all staff if there's events going on within the state or region that we should be aware of. We don't have the easiest means to go. We'd love to have things around the workplace and posters and stuff, but sometimes when you're distributed across multiple buildings and locations around the state, that makes it kind of hard. But yeah, looking at things on like intranet sites and places like that, yeah, we're definitely posting things to make our employees aware and just kind of constant reminders. So.
Definitely. Yeah, and I know both of you are leveraging our program resources available to you as part of your IQ platform as far as posters, those top 10 tip sheets and all that. So definitely makes sense. So I guess follow up then, Jeff, or excuse me, for Phil. Phil, I know you have kind of a special blend of training where you're using IQ, you're using Workplace for Facebook, but you're also reaching out to your learners in person. How does that work? And give us kind of a little rundown of your in-person training program.
Well, the in-person training program basically, excuse me, basically when I do the in-person training, I've learned long ago that, just throwing slides at people is pretty much ineffective unless they have a genuine interest in what you're talking about. So what we've done is we try to personalize it, and rather than tell them that, what we're going to train them on is how to protect the city, we turn it around and say what we're going to train you on is how to protect yourself, your finances, your family, anything you do on the internet, how to take care of things and protect yourself. So we kind of try to personalize it as much as possible. So when people listen to what we're telling them, that they're actually taking it to heart that this can benefit them, not only at work, but in their whole life.
Makes sense. Yeah, I think that's something that's frequently missed too. People, show up to work and think, oh, this is IT's job to keep my things safe, and using that in-person training and, like you said, Phil, hammering home, no pun intended, the need to have that awareness when they go inside their door at home and they're using IoT devices, et cetera. So that's great. I guess Jeff has a little different approach then, because your learners are so distributed. I'm sure a lot of the in-person training isn't quite as, feasible. So as far as with the state of Kansas and the distributed executive branches, how do you segment out your learners, given that they're so distributed and you have multiple rules, et cetera, that you're training?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, we have about 60 agencies, boards, departments, commissions, and we've segmented them out by those boards, departments, commissions, because also along the lines of the standard required security awareness training, we have several agencies that that have compliance requirements to train over specific topics such as HIPAA. We have some PCI, protecting federal tax information. So there's a whole slew of compliance requirements that a lot of agencies have, and they vary between agency to agency. So the flexibility in segmenting learners out and being able to provide targeted training to specific agencies is key. So you're not completely inundating everybody with the same training that includes things that isn't necessarily relevant to their job either, is important. Because again, you want to, as Phil alluded to, keep things concise, to the point. A lot of people don't want to be spending a whole lot of time doing this. So being able to segment out and isolate the training specific is important.
Definitely, yeah, especially with all those compliance needs across the board. Great. So I guess, Jeff, then that kind of brings up the question, were there any specific challenges that you encountered when you first kind of walked into this and were launching this from day one?
Yeah, so like with anything new, there's always challenges trying to convince agencies and organizations to give up what they'd been doing in the past, whether good or bad, doing it in the past for years, that they're always reluctant to turn it over. Even if you're offering to do it for them, manage it at no cost to them, there is still a reluctance to turn it over. But once you kind of sit down and start having the conversations, show them what you can provide, show them results from tests you've conducted, they're a little more eager to buy in. That was probably one of the major challenges. And then also from such a large distributed environment, communicating and trying to identify all those points of contact within all those agencies was also kind of a challenge, because a lot of them, like I said, either very large shops or very small shops, and just trying to figure out who to engage within each of those organizations was a challenge, but it's definitely something that's worth overcoming. Security awareness is an important topic, and once you get the initial buy-in, it's easy to get in and get going.
Definitely. And Phil, I know you mentioned that you kind of focus on and talk about security at home as well as at work. Is that kind of how you overcome some of these challenges, or are there other strategies where you overcome learner buy-in or manager buy-in? How does that work at Olathe?
Well, when I came in, when I was hired with the City of Olathe, they already had a security awareness program running, so it was a little easier for me. I basically polled everybody to try to find out, not everybody, but a portion of the employees, to find out what they liked or didn't like about the program, and started making adjustments accordingly. The program was in existence before when I came on board. So one of the big things that, one of the big complaints I received was that the program was boring. It was too long and it was boring. So that was pretty easy to overcome. It was just a matter of finding something that was engaging, that would interest people, that had a little humor in it. And just putting those pieces in to keep people engaged.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, if you're listening to what they're saying and you're making the necessary adjustments, hopefully you're getting more buy-in. So that makes a ton of sense. As far as then your measurement, Phil, what are you using specifically to gauge, your success metrics? I'm sure you have a lot in the background that folds up to that, but kind of in general, what are you using to measure success?
Well, during the quarterly phishing exercises, what I'll do is I'll compile the statistics for each agency, and basically at the end of the exercise, I'll send the heads of the agencies the metrics for their agency. I'll give them the comparison from the previous cycle to the current cycle, and then give them a picture of the overall, what the city did. So they can kind of get an idea of, how many people are clicking on email and try to take action. Same thing with the security awareness training. because the city has mandated it to be something everybody needs to go through. I try to get that training done early enough in the year so that before the holidays roll around, I can put out metrics to the different divisions and say, here's the list of employees that have not completed their training. Please ensure that they do, which in most cases it gets done because they just tell them, hey, you got to finish this, go do it. But the phishing exercises basically are really good because it gets people get to see, on a quarterly basis how everybody's doing.
Definitely makes sense. Yeah. So I know you mentioned, as far as Phil, you mentioned you're compiling these stats and sending them to the head of each agency to show current quarter's metrics and trends. Jeff, are you doing the same thing from a state level where you're reporting out to agency leaders, or does your approach differ a little bit?
No, we use very much a similar approach as Bill. I mean, really, the completion rates, enrollment rates, and then the phishing rates, and success on the awareness training piece is a combination of both of people not clicking on the simulated phishing emails and completion of the awareness training. So kind of pairing those together, much like Bill's doing, is one of our primary metrics in gauging success of the program.
Right. Yeah, it seems like a fairly straightforward process, and keeping those stakeholders engaged with the output of what your learners are doing through training and phishing. Jeff, do you use certain types of qualitative feedback that you're getting from your stakeholders or the individual learners to help guide your program?
Yeah, we try, and with the flexibility, we try and make the courses change yearly, so they're not getting the exact same content. So we've gotten some feedback since we've run this over a couple of years that learners appreciate that. So we want to continue. We want to make sure that the learners are happy in what they're getting, because we don't want to get in a place where it's just the same stuff over and over. I'm not going to pay attention to it. We don't want to be in that boat. So we've gotten some positive feedback about that. We like the delivery method. We've gotten a lot of praise on that, because people don't want another system where they're just putting in another username and password that they have to know. The tailored emails is something that we've gotten a lot of positive feedback from as well. In terms of management, communicating those numbers is stuff they hadn't been able to see or had access to in the past. So then being able to see what their organization's phishing rate is like has been a pretty big eye opener. And then getting, again, that buy-in and support from, management. And that's one of the key things, is getting management buy-in, because you want to tone from the top, more or less, that they want to ensure their organization is geared towards that security awareness and information security is important to the organization.
Exactly. Yeah, they don't want to be the department that stands out, right? For better or worse. So Phil, do you have the same approach then, as far as you're listening to individual learners? I know you're going to do in-person training. I'm sure they're giving you feedback from those end users, but also stakeholders. Are you getting similar feedback at Olathe?
Oh yeah, I've gotten feedback from people that have actually been appreciative of the phishing attacks or the phishing exercises. They've been appreciative of the phishing exercises because they're able to catch these things relatively quickly and not click on the actual, an actual phishing email. They've sent them to me where they said, hey, I saw this. And, usually when they do that, we turn around and said, gee, that's really great. Thank you so much for being so vigilant with your awareness, and keep being the human firewall, because that's one of the things we tell them, is that with all the technology that we have at our fingertips to try to stop a lot of this, at the end of the day, if it does get through that technology, they're the last link of the chain. So they're basically the eyes and ears at the end of the chain. They're human firewall. And they've actually taken that to heart, and they think that's a kind of a cool idea.
Definitely, definitely. So that kind of leads into the next question. You know, you're getting them on board, so they're part of that human firewall. You're listening to their feedback. Uh, how are you inspiring them to make sure it's their responsibility? I know you mentioned security at home, et cetera. Are there additional things to keep them engaged and feel inspired that it's not just IT's job to mitigate cybersecurity threats?
Well, yeah, again, it goes back to the same idea of with most cybersecurity threats, we try to tell them, if you see something that looks odd, please call the help desk. Don't, just, ignore it. We'd be more than happy to come out, take a look. If it's a phishing email, please send it to me. I will analyze it and let you know one way or the other. So, and the whole idea of, making it personal so that they take this home is the idea that if they're doing it at home, they'll probably do it at work because it becomes a habit.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Jeff, are you kind of in the same boat? Or is there a different approach that you take to get that buy-in and inspire them to participate and own that responsibility?
I mean, much like Phil alluded to, is making it stuff that's personal. Our ultimate goal is just trying to make a culture of being cybersecurity aware of the things that are happening, and from the state perspective, sometimes reminding, if something were to happen to the state, reminding the employees and stuff that they're citizens of the state. So if something bad, their information is there, their family's information is there. We don't want them to have their personal information compromised at home. And again, that's where the tie-in comes in, because from another perspective, if their personal information is compromised, there's the potential to defraud the state itself with that and cost the state financial resources and dealing with those. So, I mean, really trying to establish that culture of awareness, make the things personal to the people. If you're just droning on about things at work, they're just going to tune you out. They hear it day in, day out, they'll tune you out. But when it's personal, take it home, it affects them at home, their family, they take a little more interest and heart to it. So, we very much kind of follow the same strategy, make it personable so they want to participate in it.
Great. Yeah, definitely. That makes a lot of sense. And before we move on and talk about kind of your next steps for your awareness programs, just want to remind everyone that's joined the webinar to submit any questions that you have for our speakers, Jeff and Phil. If, just any questions that you have, I know we've got a lot of preset questions here, but any follow-up that they can provide some insight on maybe your specific cybersecurity awareness program or how to move forward with that program. So with that though, Jeff, you've got a lot going on with the multiple branches and rolling out to several different departments. What's kind of your next step in your security awareness program?
So our next steps are really to begin focusing on role-based security awareness training and providing training out to, executives, managers, getting content that's a little more tailored to them, and also to like application developers, sysadmins, their responsibilities with the privileges they've been afforded, have a higher degree of requirements. So we really want to focus on making them aware of the risks that they're exposed to, and continue with role-based above just the standard security awareness training.
Definitely. Yeah, I find that is pretty common with most of the clients I work with, especially at the state level with multiple branches, is getting that role-based training out. So you're really drilling into those specific compliance needs, et cetera. Phil, do you have a similar experience with role-based training at Olathe, or is it more focused on those core behaviors for your learners?
Well, it's been focused on the core behaviors up till now, and now we're starting to get to the point, like Jeff is, to start looking more toward more role-based training. our IT people are very skilled at what they do. So, beating them about, phishing and virus awareness, they already know this.
Right.
So it's kind of ridiculous to send them something that they already know, and it's just like, oh, I gotta do this again. So I'm looking more toward doing that kind of training in the future, figuring out what people's roles are, what would be more appropriate for them, and go down that route. And that again goes back to the other things we're doing with our learning management system and workplace site that we can roll out this kind of training to people that they can kind of go out there and voluntarily look at it. My goal here is to make this program not so much mandatory but voluntary, where people actually want to go out and look and seek this information out.
Definitely. And I think that's the sign of a pretty mature program if you have folks coming to you looking for additional training. So I think that's a great next step and moving your program forward for the years to come. So I guess as far as with those next steps and other folks that are listening and sending questions in right now, Phil, what advice would you give to somebody that's looking to do a similar program like you've rolled out?
Well, naturally, you have to have the head of IT has to be fully on board with it. If
Right.
they're not, it's a waste of time. But you're because you're kind of like rolling a BB up a mountain. It's going to take you forever. But so you need a champion to help you get the message out to the other executives and the other agencies, and getting them on board and to understand at a high level of to why we need to do this and why this is important. Nowadays, it's actually I hate to say it, but the hackers have actually made it a lot easier to get a program initiated, because with all the hacks that have been out there and ransomware against governments, against healthcare, against everybody, it's fairly easy to sell a program that says, hey, we need to train our people on how not to click on this stuff. So as you start to roll it out, you start looking at each department or agency that you're dealing with and try to figure out, what are the core things that they need to understand to keep their operations going. Because from an IT standpoint, we're essentially, we don't own the data, we manage it. There's some stuff we own, but really and truthfully, we manage the data for the rest of the organization. So we have to kind of really be aware of what other people are doing, what other agencies are doing, and what their hot buttons are, so we can try to get them to understand that this is why it's so important for everybody to do this.
Absolutely. I think that's great advice. Jeff, do you have a similar perspective? Maybe some additional thoughts about advice that you would give from when you started day one and looking back from now?
No, Phil is spot on. Executive and management buy-in is key. Getting them to understand this isn't just IT training. This is information security training. Data belongs to the business units and the departments, and if something were to happen to them, it's them that suffers. IT is just managing it. So really getting their buy-in that this is important to them. They want it important to their organization. Is key to success. If you don't have buy-in and they're not setting that tone from the top, employees pick up on that very quickly, and they're just going to ignore whatever you send them, because they know they're not going to be held accountable for not taking it because management doesn't care. So you want to make sure you have their buy-in, get them communicating it out and the importance of it. I think that is probably one of the primary keys to a successful implementation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks, Jeff. So it looks like we've come up to a stopping point to open up this presentation for participant questions. So I'm going to hand this over to Tyler just to walk through some questions for Jeff and Phil. And go ahead, Tyler.
Thanks, Anya, and thanks, Jeff and Phil. It was great discussion. There's still time to submit some questions, so feel free to send those over. There's already a couple coming in that we'll jump to. Jeff and Phil, I'll send your way. The first is, what types of simulated phishing emails do you typically send? I guess, Phil, we could start with you. Do you have any sort of advice on, the types of simulations you typically pick and something that someone else from a different organization might, or you might give advice to gravitate towards?
Sure. It depends. A lot of times it depends on what's currently going on in the world. What are people, what's the current attacks? What are people falling for? Those are the kind of things I'm going to look for and try to send out, because that's what, to send out something, the things I found out that says, if you send out something that says, hey, this is the FBI and we've noticed your machine is doing this or that, nobody falls for that. They really don't. It's got a very poor click rate. But something that might say, hey, this is the HR department and we're updating our phone list, click here to verify your information. And getting people to hover their mouse over that link to be able to see, oh, this is not going internally, it's going somewhere else. That's part of the training. So I try not to make it super easy. I try to make it difficult for people to identify, because I want them to look at, what I want them to do is I want them to look at that return address. I want them to identify whether the link is valid. I want them to think a little more than just, click because, oh, I got to do this, click right now. I want them to think a little bit about that email. So I tend to not make them too easy. Now, granted, when we started doing the program, we made them very easy, made it easy for people to click on this stuff and identify and say, oh, we got this. And then they'd get a congratulations message afterwards. But now I'm at the point where it's like, no, we're going to make it a little harder, and we're going to make it a little more relevant to what's out there today.
Absolutely. Yeah, then that's great advice. And it's certainly a sign of, as Sonia mentioned before, a maturing program. Jeff, did you have any other, tactical advice or any simulations that you typically gravitate towards?
Yeah, we tend to typically, obviously, try and make it pretty random. People tend to talk. So if you're doing, one message or two messages that are the same across, they're going to pick up pretty quickly, and it'll kind of defeat some of the purposes. So using kind of a large pool of messages and mixing up, whether it's just going to be a drive-by link click or putting in some credential harvesting type phishing messages, because it is important to gather both metrics on if people are clicking and if they're taking that next step of submitting credentials to a malicious site. That gives you a really good metric, and again, another teaching opportunity, because it's key to reiterate that this is not a opportunity to beat somebody over the head because they've done something wrong. Use this as a learning and a teaching moment, not to get people in trouble. They tend to be a lot more receptive to that. If they know they're not getting in trouble for something, you start tending to get more honest statistics. So mixing up in terms of the type of phishing messages is important. Also including some that have some macro-enabled Word documents and things like that. It allows you to see how far users go. So it is important to collect all those metrics and use all those different types of phishing messages.
Absolutely, and we definitely see that on our side. You can certainly train employees to get really good at certain types of phishing simulations, but it really does come down to actually true training and actually covering the whole spectrum. I think this next question kind of piggybacks on the first. And Jeff, we can start with you. Obviously cybersecurity is a pretty broad topic. How do you choose the topics to cover on the training side?
So for us, our state policy has some specific topics to cover within our training. So we cover those as a requirement, but we'll look at kind of like Phil had mentioned, if there's hot topics going on, we'll try and include those in the early training, make a little more prevalent. So, you know, as of recent, especially with executive business email compromise, not a required topic, but that is a very relevant topic the past year or so. So we've included that in our training. So it's kind of easy for us since that we've got a standard, but from a management perspective, it also makes it hard because we want to change that up on a yearly basis, but we still have those compliance requirements to the state policy. But yeah, kind of focusing on what's relevant. You know, the modular systems for awareness training are great because it allows you to be pretty flexible in what content you deliver to them. And also, you know, how you set up your program, if you do it all at one time or if you're very flexible and, you know, deliver content over the course of the year, also makes it easier to change the content.
Yeah, absolutely. Phil, how about you from your perspective? How do you sort of decide how you build out that curriculum?
More along the same line that, you know, Jeff stated, is a lot of it's depending on, you know, what's out there in the world environment. But for the most part, you know, a lot of it's going to be repetitive because I can go into more detail on how to detect phishing attack, how to protect yourself from identity theft, things like this. I can go into more detail on the training than I can on a phishing simulation. So a lot of the stuff is I'll repeat things on a yearly basis that I don't cover in phishing attacks, or I may not be able to cover anywhere else. Those things I'll repeat, but I try to find different ways to send that message. I may be sending the same message as to, you know, here's how to avoid phishing attacks, but I'm always looking for a different way to deliver the message. So maybe one year it'll be all about, you know, here's what a simulated phishing email looks like. Don't click on this stuff. And another year it might be an animated sequence that talks about that. So I try to, you know, it's the same information, but it's presented in a different manner to try to get people to, you know, watch it, look at it, and refresh their memory about it.
Absolutely. So the next question is coming in, actually a couple kind of about sort of administrative tasks. So part one, is security awareness your primary responsibility? Obviously, I think we know the answer to that on our side, but, and second part of that, how many people do you have helping you run your program? Jeff, do you want to start there?
So yeah, security awareness is not my primary responsibility. It is part of my responsibilities, but it's not my primary one. And right now, I've got about 4 people that work for me that have the ability to administer it, but I really only have one person who goes on in there into the platform on a regular basis to manage what's going on. You know, with the resource constraints that's what we got, we'd obviously like to be definitely more involved, doing things in a continuous manner. You know, kind of like Phil, we want to get to the point where we can put stuff out there that is optional, and we want to see what people are doing optionally. So, and sure, we really only have one person in there managing it for about 18,000 users.
Sure, and that's something that we've obviously seen a lot of times, and it's obviously a tall task, right, to handle training for a large amount of people, but it's also something that, you know, it can be done even from a small staff or even one person running it. Phil, do you have any other thoughts there?
Well, I don't have 18,000 people, that's for sure. I'm more along the line of about 1,700, which is a little easier to manage by far. And it's not, like Jeff, it's not my primary responsibility. It's part of my responsibilities. So, and I'm a one-man show here. So there's really, I don't have anybody that really, outside of my CIO that helps me push the program and helps me with thoughts and suggestions. There's really nobody that actually implements the program other than myself.
Yeah, and I think that's great context too. I think it's a lot of people that are really on top of the security awareness and training space. There's a lot of really big, lofty goals and a lot that you can do. And I think a lot of people sometimes think that there's massive teams behind a lot of these efforts. And really, the truth is, there's a lot of people out there like you guys who have huge responsibilities with, limited staff, but are still able to put that program together. So we're kind of bumping up against time. If we did not get your question, we'll certainly follow up following this this presentation. Next steps here, we will. This was all recorded, so we're going to send this over to you, any attendees, later today. And again, we'll follow up with questions. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining today. And thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Sonia, for walking through the entire conversation. We'll talk to everyone next time. Have a good day.